Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Candlepower Hour, Surviving Show Business.
Hi. Every now and again, the small world scenario pops up in your life. You meet folks and friends through unusual circumstances and events, and you end up knowing someone through those folks who know that person, and the world becomes smaller in amazing ways. And if that makes sense, today our world is getting bigger through small world situations. And that's what I wanted to say. The Candlepower Hour is here with Bruce Robb. Over 300 gold and platinum records in his credits. And we're going to talk to royalty once again. We're very honored to have Bruce Robb with us in studio with his guests, Tiffany and Minnie. Welcome, Bruce Robb. Thank you.
Welcome.
It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you very much.
Introduction is going to be hard to live up to.
It was confusing. I confused myself. I had to redo it a couple
I
times.
was getting impressed with me for a minute.
Well, here we go. Question. What do Steve Cropper, Henry Rollins, John Cougar Mellencamp, Macy Gray, Robin Ford, John Carpenter, Ringo Starr, Jean-Luc Ponty, Tower of Power, Cher, The Cars, David Bowie, Selena, Art Garfunkel, Motley Crue, Soul Asylum, Robin Williams, I'm going to need water because this is a huge list, John Belushi, and Dan Aykroyd all have in common?
Mr. Bruce Robb,
I think it's Cherokee.
Cherokee Studios.
Yeah.
Bruce
Yeah.
Robb.
We're
We're going to ask you, let's start from the beginning because we got to
Okay.
get going.
Well,
The Robbs
The way
and,
this-
and how you started in Milwaukee.
yeah, well, the way this started was I have two brothers, myself, and we were three kids that had lived in a small lake in Wisconsin. And music was always part of what we did. There was an upright piano down there, and we'd go down and play and sing together and stuff like that. And, you know, at the holidays, the folks would trot us out to do our party piece, that kind of thing, but that kind of got boring. And as time went on, and I remember sitting outside when I heard Big Joe Turner's Shake, Rattle, and Roll. And I thought, something just changed. Beginning of rock and roll. And it was unbelievable. It snowballed so fast. It seems like it went over a long period of time, but it was almost overnight. It just swept the country. And it was amazing. We had, oh my God, artists that, you know, Little Richard, his only connection to music is he worked in a delicatessen. Whatever they were playing is all he got to hear. Where does that come from? What is it? It's pure talent. It's nothing that you can learn. It's nothing that you can practice. It's there or it's not. And that was the kind of talent that made, you know, that made music happen, that made rock and roll happen. As far as I'm concerned, the assembly line and rock and roll are the two biggest things that we've done.
The Robbs is how you started.
Yeah.
And you were in Milwaukee putting that together.
Yeah, we like I said, we lived out in a little town outside Milwaukee that had like 1,900 people in it and everything. And so we were our own best friends. During the winter, most of the people would go into Milwaukee and stay there, but we stayed out at our place. So we got to a point to where we were playing some local gigs and things like that. And we all went to the same school. And when I was 13, I'm sitting in class, and my big brother and second big brother walks by the window of the school, and I said, okay, and teacher, can I go to the bathroom? And sure. So I go outside and said, what's up? They said, if we can make it to Cobo Hall in Detroit tomorrow, we can join the first Cliff Richards and Dave Clark 5 tour. And it was like, oh boy, we were gone. We beat it out of the school, packed up our gear, and headed for it. And actually, that was the beginning of it. We pretty much stayed there. I've never done anything else. So,
How did Dick Clark come into your life? And apparently
Okay,
you
that's-
became you got onto one of his shows.
yeah, well, that was cool. We, like I say, when we were a young band like that, we were playing a lot of local gigs. There's a battle of the bands where you got an opening spot on the Dick Clark Summer Caravan of Stars, and that was the biggest tour of the year every year. It was all the major stars. And we won the thing because we'd been practicing in our boathouse. So we go and we do our show, and then the main attractions come on, and Dick Clark's personal assistant came out to the stage as we were getting off and said, Mr. Clark, I'd like to see you in the dressing room. And we're going, wow. And we go in there and he said, "Who are you? You're just kids." And he said, "Why are you this good? Why do you play and sing like this? What's going on?" And he was one of the coolest people I've ever met. There was nothing uptight about him. He was just immediately became just one of the guys. And he said, "Look, how would you like to finish the tour with us and back up the artists that don't have bands?" And the artists were Dion, Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, the Everly Brothers. It goes on forever. It was awesome. And the tour went great. So pretty soon, it just got to be the regular thing where Dick would call us and say, "Okay, it's time for another caravan. Are you in?" We'd say, "Yep." So we did that for, I don't know how many summers. And we kept our touring up, and we had a pretty big circuit. We could tour the whole country, and we'd do the East Coast in the warm parts, and then move west as it got to winter, and we could take a year and going back and forth. So we do that, and one time we're in somewhere out east, and we hear that Dick Clark is putting on this event, which is called the Dick Clark Young World's Fair, and it was at the amphitheater in Chicago. And the amphitheater had two big arenas that both of them held, I don't know, 14,000, 17,000. And he had both of them, and it was really cool. It was everything for kids. The skateboards were introduced then, stuff like that. And so it was just awesome, and it was jammed. And it also had the biggest acts in the world on it. Back then it was like, the Who and the Kinks and the Stones and everything like that. It was amazing. So we hear there's a contest for the Battle of the Bands. Whoever wins the Battle of the Band gets to go on the opening day and play the first show. So we win, and we go out and we play, and there were two shows a day, an afternoon show and an evening show, and Dick Clark was there, but he was running around doing stuff. And we do our show and get off stage. He says, "What are you guys doing here?" We said, "We won." He said, "Oh, man." He said,
Wow.
"All right, here we go." And so the evening show, they come out, and the kids have made a giant banner that said "The Robs" across it and hang it to the thing. And Dick's looking at it and going, And he said, "How'd you like to stay for the whole show?" It was 10 days. And we said, "Yeah, great." And so we had a pretty good spot in the show. And while we're there, he says, "We're going to shoot where the action is down at the Twin Towers in Chicago. And we'd like you guys to come and do it."
That's a television show.
Yeah, Where the Action Is was a national daily show that was all on locations. And so we go down and we're saying, "All right, so what do we need?" And Dick said, "Just bring your current record." And we said, "All right." So then we go back to the room and said, "We don't have a record. What are we going to do?" So we stayed up for a couple days and wrote what was our first record. And it did really good. There's a song called "Race with the Wind." And we charted with it, and it was amazing. So, Dick Clark sees all of this going by, and we finish that. And so we start out on another tour, and we don't get too far. And he calls up and says, "We have a group on the show that's leaving the show, that we're losing their regulars here, and how would the Robs like to take their place?" So here we go. And it just snowballed from there. We're doing that, and it doesn't seem like it's much now, but we were reaching 18 million people a day on the show. And now it'd be hundreds of millions, but back then it was huge.
Massive numbers.
Oh yeah, it was just awesome, and it was all locations, and so it was insane. We couldn't.
So before that, and before you tracked those songs, you were touring without a record, without a
Oh yeah.
song.
Yeah, no, we toured,
Just
and we had a
rolling.
pretty good circuit. It was mostly clubs, and then small arenas, what were skating rinks, things like that, where
Right.
they could get 2,000 or 3,000 people in.
Right.
I mean, some of there were skating rinks. They come out and put plywood over the ice, and then halfway through the show, because it was winter, they'd condense and rain on the stage inside. So it made it a little difficult, but it was the beginning of rock and roll. You do whatever you got the chance to do. Yeah.
Now, the festival that you did in Chicago
Mhm.
was that was known as the Summerfest?
No, that was the Young World's Fair.
The Young World's Fair.
Yeah, Summerfest came later.
The Summerfest came later.
Yeah.
Can you explain the Summerfest?
Well, what happened though is we head to L.A. and start doing the shows, and they shoot 5 days a week. but due to weather, it's any 5 days. We can't tour. And so we're asking Dick, we're saying, look, we're a band and we haven't played in like 2 or 3 months. And Dick said, yeah, he said, I knew this was coming up. He said, we need to find you a local gig house band thing. So the next day he says, I got you a house band. We said, great, what do you got? And he said, it's at the Whiskey. And there's 3 house bands. And the 3 house bands were us, the Chambers Brothers, and the Doors. And nobody had records yet. That summer, everything came out, Light My Fire and Fire by the Chambers Brothers and our record. And 1966, I think. Was that the Summer of Love? I think it was, yeah. So I'm terrible on chronology.
Year I was born.
Yeah. But so anyway, that takes off. We book a tour. And it was a Dick Clark, another Dick Clark tour, but this one was Paul Revere and the Raiders were headlining it and stuff like that. And so we get out and we finish that tour and we get a call from the mayor of Milwaukee. And, you know, we've been kind of from Milwaukee. They finally got to like us. It was, you know, back in the 60s when it first started and everybody had long hair, it was touchy, you know. But they said, look, we're doing this first Summerfest this year, and we've overlooked something, and we thought it might be important. We've overlooked the music. Would you guys be interested in, you know, taking charge and producing the stage events? And so we thought, yeah, absolutely. And by that time, the show was over, so we were touring. We'd gone out, and the band grew from 14 pieces to 11 or 12-piece band. We came up with full horn sections, everything like that, because we just felt that the show got us too much of a pop image, and we weren't. We were country rock, folk rock, rock and roll. It was that kind of band.
Right.
So it just naturally got, you know, kind of turned around and morphed into it. So we put the stage show together, and I think Summerfest lasts for, what was it? Was it a week or 10 days? I don't know. But it's become the biggest festival in the world, and we put the first show together, and we get there, and you've got a stage. It's a 20-foot by 20-foot plywood stage about this high. And we said, I don't think that's going to be big enough. And they're going, what do you mean? We said, well, if we're doing this, we're doing this. So we got Ringling Brothers and rented one of the big tops, and it was amazing. However, we had a near catastrophe there that could have been really bad. First or second day of the thing, we had the big top sold out, which was, I don't know, 4,500 or 5,000 they hold. And a storm comes in off Lake Michigan, and a tornado forms. And it comes through and it picks the tent up just high enough that the tent poles drop, and it collapsed on a full house. Oh. And it was unbelievable. I mean, the story of getting that thing out, one guy got hurt, a light fell on him, but all the other people got out because of the Flying Zucchini Brothers, which the human cannon. And the whole family would be there, and it was just to see these things go down was just amazing. And they came in, and they'd obviously been through these before, and they
knew it. They
had canvas bags full of tent pegs and mallets, and they'd run in and stake things down. They thought, what are they doing? But it was amazing.
Wow.
So that was the first Summerfest.
That was billed as in the Guinness Book of World Records as the largest festival ever at that time.
Yeah. That was wonderful. And that
was wonderful.
Yeah, incredible. They'd overlooked music. Yeah. That anybody could do that.
The history is incredible. And so now let's jump to, you started tracking with other bands, and you began with the Lemonheads. Is that one of your first projects?
No. What happened then is we came back off tour, and we lived at a place called the Tropicana, which, if you haven't Googled it, do. It's something, when you read this story, Sandy Koufax bought this motel and was going to make it into this star-studded thing, and it turned into the rock and roll capital for everybody. The Doors, everybody. The Doors, the Jefferson Airplane, Steppenwolf, all these things, and we all lived there. And oh my God, what a summer! There was no better spot at 3 a.m. than the Tropicana pool. It was amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. So from that, we'd on the road. We'd been on Atlantic, Chess Records, RCA, and when we came out here, we were really fascinated with Dunhill, because Dunhill was a very small label, and they had the Mamas and Papas and couple other major acts. Ultimately, I believe Crosby, Stills and Nash were with them. You know, it's like I'm saying, it's a small label, and it wasn't an indie, but at the time it kind of was. Then it became ABC, saw what it was, and they shined the light on it. So we did our first 2 records that were major releases on that. We did 2 albums with Dunhill out here, and Dunhill announced that they had a little studio there, and he said, now you can come in and record and do all your stuff. Because what Dunhill would do is when we'd finish a tour, they'd book a studio for you to go in and just put down a demo of all the songs you'd written on the tour. Because that's pretty much where everything came from in those days. And they called up and said, look, we've got our own studio now, and so you can use this. So when you want to do demos, then come on in. We said, great, we're ready. And they said, oh, Three Dog Night's in for 2 months. And we're going, no, they just canceled the demo budget. So we had moved from the Tropicana out to Chatsworth, and we had a horse ranch out there. We had 6 horses on in the barn, and we converted the barn into our first studio. And it was pretty interesting, especially since our neighbors were Spawn Ranch with Charlie Manson, and that's when that whole thing went down. But that's another story too.
Oh, I mean, let's get into it.
Oh God. Well, we were, to cut to the chase, you know, I'd find we had orange groves on the ranch, and I'd come out and it'd be full of little kids, sort of hippies, and no shoes and socks, and they're picking oranges. And I'd say, what are you doing? And they said, we're picking oranges and grapefruits. And I said, the house is right over there. You could ask. And they said, Charlie told us we could.
Wow.
And we said, well, you tell Charlie to, you know, take the oranges. But there was nothing intimidating about these people. They were annoying. They were just little hippies with dirty feet. And so was Charlie. But he was older and had this mentality, which I later recognized as the prison mentality. And they can be pretty scary people psychologically. I mean, since he was only that tall, it wasn't intimidating. But this all went on for quite a while, and we had a couple times where they'd gotten into the house on their what they called creepy crawly missions. And in one of them, we came back, and we had 2 Great Danes, and we used to take them with us in our tour bus, but this one was Disneyland, and we couldn't leave them in the bus all night. So we come back, and they'd been through the house, and the dogs had tried to go through with the glass windows at something, and they were cut up, and we thought, oh man, and sure enough, furniture was moved around. And about a week later, I wake up, and we've got our orange groves, and I'm squeezing fresh orange juice in the morning, which for a band, because, you know, you didn't make that much money just playing locally like that. And we were building the studio. So, you know, we'd work and go out and play and, you know, club. So anyway, I look out the window, and there's about 20 cop cars out there in the driveway, and this was shaking. And I'm going, what do we got here? And my dad was visiting us. So I said, Pappy, here, wake up. I said, there's somebody here to see you. And I sent him out. He was the only respectable one there. So we sent him out, and the cops, yeah, and he was really, you know, he was incredible. He stayed with us through the entire Cherokee Studios and everything.
Wow.
But he talks him down, and we get through that okay.
They're there for Charlie.
Yeah, they were. Well, yeah, but they look in. Here's a bunch of long-haired guys with a bus, and there's something about buses that they associated with Charlie.
Right.
And it was like they were freaked.
The whole hilltop of hippies.
They thought they'd caught another section of them, but my dad went in and passed out records and said, "No, this is a real band," and so on.
That's amazing, because that's the beginning of a massive legacy known as Cherokee Studios.
Yeah, and the ranch was the first Cherokee Studios, and just because the band, we had changed the name from the Robs when I was saying we went from a 4-piece to a 12-piece band, because we went out to Woodshed and we locked ourselves into a place, and we gathered a bunch of local musicians and stuff and rehearsed for 3 months straight. And it was tight. When the music started, you'd count the first song off, and all the way to the end of the 1-hour show, the music never stopped. And it was really cool. And we had a couple funny things happen. We were playing a club, and we were with Atlantic at this point on the East Coast. And we go out with the band, our band, we send the bands out and they start playing a riff and an instrumental and it was cool. Then 4 of us would come out and sit down on our instruments and it would morph into the first song and it was off and running from then. And I play a thing called a Hammond B3 and they're fabulous instruments, but it's an organ, a keyboard. And if you turn it off and turn it on, 99 times out of 100 is fine, but every now and then, if you turn it off and turn it on too fast, like something's been unplugged or something, it'll run at a different speed and the tone will be different, and all of our guys are tuning to it. So they tune to it. I noticed right away, that's no good, and I quick unplug it, restart the B3 and turn it out. And so as soon as the riff starts and we come out to start, there is this cacophonous noise that's just like, oh my God, what is this? It's like, hundreds of car horns honking. And Atlantic is out there with the whole staff. We were due to be re-signing. And they came and said, you guys, that was the greatest thing I've ever seen. That was hysterical. He said, you come out, and because we turned around and told the band, don't make another sound. Just stand there for the rest of the show. And they wore red monk's robes and welder's glasses. So it was kind of,
sort of fit the...
Yeah.
What some of the early acts that you had in the studio at Cherokee in Chatsworth went on to also make some pretty amazing albums there.
Oh,
and you got kicked out because it was becoming successful.
An illegal home studio.
So why was it illegal?
Because we were buying it on a lease purchase, and the landlord's son played bass, and they asked, could he hang out in the studio?
Oh, he was a little jelly.
Yeah. And once they locked it up, he and the sheriff came out and locked us out. And once we cleared out and everything, then he opened it up and ran it for 15 more years.
He wanted his own studio.
And at first, we were really upset, but I'm so glad you did it.
Right.
It wouldn't have happened at that point. We bought what was MGM, which nobody knew was for sale yet. And
you had the ends.
Cherokee, we were at the last act that we were doing out there was Rick Nelson. And we were in the middle of the record, so we brought Rick in to the studio and got one of the studios, because MGM was pretty sterile in those days. We were the first independent studio, really. There wasn't another one. And we'd recorded in so many studios that we found it was not necessarily a pleasant experience. You'd go in and it was mostly fluorescent lights. There were hardly any colored lights. The engineers are all union engineers. And it was like, wow, we did Woody Herman last night and it was awesome. And he said, what do we got today? Oh, some rock and roll band. I don't know. And he said, gee, we feel like playing. And most studios were kind of like that. It wasn't necessarily a friendly thing. Corporate run. So we came in and took MGM off the air immediately for 2 or 3 months while we fixed it. And at that point, Rick Nelson was in with us. And pretty soon we're getting things. They get a call at the front desk. They said, Keith Moon's here. And I was like, okay, cool. So I go out and I'm hanging with Keith for, that's also another story, but a long one.
So you've tracked Keith Moon?
Not exactly. I was, Rick said if he comes in here, the session's going to stop.
Oh, God.
And he said, Bruce, either you and D, my other oldest brother's D, and we were both recording. He said, could one of you guys keep him busy? Well, I kept him busy for about a day and a half. And then I ended up somewhere up north in his limo, and he had a driver that they'd drive up in front of a bar, and he'd run in and blow a bugle, and Keith would put on an outfit and run into the bar, and usually he'd get thrown out. And so he did this for a while, but I kept him out of the way. But we did Rick Nelson, and then while that was there and going on, we get, and I think the first one is at Frank Sinatra's here at the front door. And we realized Frank Sinatra, we've never, and he thought, oh, wait a minute, this was MGM. We inherited him. And so that was incredible. And we had a wonderful time with him. He became friends. We realized that Sinatra said he's different, the people say he's difficult to work with. And his producer would say, don't talk to him unless he talks to you. Only call him Mr. Sinatra and don't ask him for a mic check. So he walks into the control room and says, so you guys are the new owners? And he said, yeah. He said, I heard your family. And we said, yeah. And all three of us happened to be in there. And he said, I like families. And you couldn't smoke or drink or anything in MGM. So my brother rolls in a bar cart. And Sinatra's just looking at it going, okay. and sits for about an hour or more while the whole orchestra is there telling us road stories.
Nice.
And they were just like the road stories we had. He was another guy. He was another musician and a great talent. And he did not particularly like the industry. And he'd mess with them. He'd leave the orchestra sitting there and run up a $30,000 bill. And they say, what are they going to do? Drop me? That's okay. But yeah, we became, good friends with him. And a couple times he invited us to go to Caesars in Vegas when he was doing the show. And that was really cool. And then one of the times that he's coming in about a week, we get a call from the front desk and they said, David Bowie's here. I was like, oh, wow, here we go some more. And same thing, he said, I'm doing my album here. And we had a great time with him. Bowie was one of the most talented people I've ever met, and also one of the nicest people. This guy would stay and clean up the control room with us after the session. He'd say, no, it's our studio. Let's see, I'm fine. We thought, this is so cool. And he was just awesome. And a lot of people said some things about him during that, about he doesn't even remember making the album or he was so stoned. I'm sorry, you don't make a record like that when you're that stoned. Was he stoned? Probably. Everybody was to a degree. It was, 70s.
Sure.
Good Lord. But he was a wonderful client, and things just poured into Cherokee. It became something that there wasn't really much of anything like it. We didn't have any house engineers. We had second engineers because house engineers would come in, and it wasn't always pleasant for them to come into another studio. The existing engineers would not really do anything to make it great. So, and we realized that. So our second engineers were basically all full-on record-cutting engineers, and their job was to make the engineer and the producer look as good as you can. If something breaks, fix it before they know it. And it was great. We ran 24 hours a day, and I know that Rod Stewart was in the day and David Bowie was in the night in the same room, so we'd have to break down and stuff. And it was unique.
The amount of interaction that you've had with so many incredible legends, being from musicians to producers to actors, you've produced soundtracks.
Yeah, well, that's why.
How did you bridge into becoming an engineer and a producer?
Well, when we were on the road, as I was saying, we toured all over, and particularly in the South, they didn't really like us. As you go through Georgia and stuff, it was pretty dangerous having long hair, but we had friends, which is another story, that were rodeo cowboys.
Mercury Easy Rider.
Yeah. Our tour manager was an ex bronc rider, and he invited all his friends from the rodeo, and they'd follow us around, and so everything was cool. That was great. But it was something that we would go into studios, because when we were on the road, and then we didn't have at that time, Dunhill was the last record label we were with. And, it was either drive back to New York and try and record at Atlantic or go to RCA or one of the, whatever label we were with. And it didn't work out. So we'd have to go to studios, small studios, and they'd go out of their way to make it difficult, to give us out-of-phase patch chords and stuff. So we had to learn. And it was really, to me, it was the way to do it. You can learn how the board works and how this works and how that works. But it takes a while to know what to do with it and what to use these things on to make it sound. And the idea isn't that you're going to impress with a great engineer. It's you're making a record and you want to impress everybody with this great record that you've made. So it behooved you to make everything in favor of the artist. And I don't know if there were any other studios that were really owned by artists then. Electric Lady came along after that. And, Jimi Hendrix was pretty involved in that. And that was also an instant success. But it's the music thing is the studios weren't independent. There were a lot of them label owned, and it was the music business. And music isn't a business. I'm sorry, it's an art. And anybody that tells you it's anything different, okay, there's no wrong way to do it, but it's not music as we know it, and it's not the talent and the inspiration and these wonderful songs that you hear and these incredible artists that you hear. So it was difficult for people to do that. So when we had before that with the ranch, people, like I was saying, Steely Dan would come out to the ranch, Little Richard came out, Bob Crewe who was Bob Crewe and Bob Gaudio were the ones who started the Four Seasons and wrote all of their stuff. They were huge, and we started. We had the first hit disco record, and the term disco was then applied to music because discos were discotheques where you'd go to dance, and that started disco. And Crewe probably wrote 30 or 40% and produced of the disco records. He was unbelievable, an incredible talent. But that all started at the ranch, and they followed us in. So
working with these artists and I call legends, you know, for instance, you interacted with all four Beatles.
yeah,
And so when you look back on your incredible, and I want to say legacy and history, and all these folks who are long gone and respected,
oh, so
how do
many,
you feel,
so
you know,
many.
that you know them, you've had these incredible experiences with them and relationships, you know, traveling up the coast.
like I was saying, Sinatra was a great example of it.
Yeah.
He was a musician. Well, so were the other guys. And the thing is, we were a band that had played thousands of shows before we ever had the studio.
Yeah.
And we appreciated what they were, and they knew it. And we went out of our way to make it to where all you got to think about here is your music.
Did you ever feel intimidated in the recording process with these folks, or
No, not
in
with
the
those
collaborating
folks.
process? You
No,
know, just
Not with those folks. There were a few intimidating acts that were there, but they were being purposely intimidating.
right.
So
Did you feel like you were at another level, like another tier of finding a muse because you were around such legends?
well, sort of. Although I mean, it's we also had a lot of acts that were incredibly talented that didn't make it, and there were some things that were just incredible. And what was so cool about that is the other acts. I can remember working with an actor who was big at the time, but he was big with the Guess Who, and Burton Cummings was doing his solo albums, and I was producing it. And I did a couple albums with Burton, but it would be like, God, we need some background singers today. And I said, let me see who's here. And I got Glenn Fry, I got Timmy Schmidt, I got Carl Wilson, and Burton. I said, you're going to have to sing background with these guys. Oh, my God. It was like, what do you want us to sing? Whatever you want. And they came up with backgrounds. It was like, you know, we had a couple of Eagles out there and one Crosby, Stills and Nash. It was amazing. But they were there, and bands used to help each other then. They went out of their way. It's like these guys need records. This is that. And to that day, we still have those kind of relationships with people, with, you know, the Jeff Baxters and Steve Croppers and
Right.
people like
And
that.
speaking of talent, you were mentioning about how this industry isn't just about making money, it's about wanting to be a part of it. So what is your take on that, especially with modern day artists?
I've yet to find the point that I want to make money. Okay, I'll make a hit record. That'll do it. Well, you sometimes can, and I've seen it happen a lot with labels doing that, but you probably won't have another one. Those are the acts that you can't remember who was the number one act last year. And well, let me preface this. There's no wrong way to do this. Any way you want, but it's the people that are writing songs because they're coming out of them and they have to. And the bands that are out playing and practicing because they have to. And lately it's been, what genre is this? Oh, well, we don't do that genre. And we've had some really incredible acts come in, labels come in and say, oh my God, that's incredible. But, you know, should I like this? And it's like, oh no, that's what's wrong. And so what's happening is everything is running its course. And now music is starting to morph into something else again. I heard somebody talking about, you know, the thing with the genres that I'm talking about. And they're saying this is terrible. But I mean, now there's all these bands coming from different directions and we don't have any genre. Now you're talking. Now you're talking what music's all about. You're not supposed to have a genre. You're not supposed to have every record sound just like the other. And, you know, I can, you know, in certain types of music, I can swear that for every 2 years they'll make a new track and everybody will play to it. But it's become lacking that feel and the excitement that musicians get when they're out all playing together and making a record with a great song. And, you know, you're not doing 70 takes of it. You're maybe doing 2. And that's because you're working with that kind of talent. And the first things are usually the best. And then all musicians will start thinking, okay, well, I can make this better. And by they get to take 10, it's a different song. So
So the idea that this is just that there's a formula for it is just
no,
baloney.
the music thing is something, it's the second oldest business in the world.
What's the first?
You hoes.
Yeah.
Prostitutes.
Prostitution. So they say.
Serious. No,
But now I have a
Yeah.
question about recording and what we were just talking about, as far as home studio versus a recording studio that is outfitted, such
Commercial.
as Cherokee. What is your opinion on that, and in relations to what you said, gathering together in community and recording a record as opposed to making a record all over the world,
Yeah.
sending tracks here, bouncing here and there?
Yeah. Well, the home studio thing, the technology that made home studios possible has been a wonderful thing. But when the industry starts getting over 1 million new songs a day, they're not necessarily all of them great or good, or even with anyone that's, that's musically inclined, but some of them are. And so, they have to filter those out and things. But with what's happening now, no, home studios are great and it's great things are cut in them, but there's still the element that recognizes, and this goes all the way back to, Booker T and the MGs and Muscle Shoals, rhythm section and all that kind of thing, where there is an excitement that you cannot get doing it in the box with one musician at a time. You lay down your beats and put it in the grid, and that's the drum track. And there's been so many times when it's like, how's that? And I say, well, I push the 3 on the bass. And the drums say, shall I do that? And they'll say, no, just do it with the bass. Just push the 3 and you hit. So when that happens, the whole band changes slightly. And they don't know it. And all of a sudden it drops into this groove. And if a song doesn't have a groove, it's, to me, very unmusical, and to a lot of people, very unmusical. It's just the same beats all the way through. And producers in particular are looking for something, some way to do this, working the way they're working now. They're saying, I don't know how to make my records any different than anyone else's. They're all the same. We're using all the same plugins and things like that. All right, but
Same formulas.
yeah, but I mean, they could say, oh, well, Pro Tools, that's what's doing it. No, it isn't. Don't you like Steely Dan? It's Pro Tools, and it's incredible. So it's who's driving and what they know. And musically, do you know what a groove feels like? Do you know what it is when you just hear that? And those are the records that you had to keep lifting a needle and playing again and again. And you've had plenty of those, I imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah, the difference is there's a human element to it, that when you're playing in the studio and when people come in, bands come in, I'll get all the instruments up and sounding the way I want them and say, all right, let's go just run one down. Mistakes or not, just play it down. And we'll take it and whatever.
Yeah.
And you say, all right, who do you want to start? All of you. And it's like, we've never made a record like this.
There's something about putting the singer in the bathroom and the guitar player in the closet.
Yep.
And stuffing the amp down the hall for that one reverb that it's getting because of the wood floors.
And also, it's really hard. It's really hard to do a song without a guide vocal, and a lot of bands do that. But those are things like the Wrecking Crew and things like that. Everything that's written out and it's right there. And the bands I prefer are bring in your chord charts and go through them, and then before we start takes, put them down. And you wrote the song, you shouldn't need a word sheet, because the difference is just staggering. I know that Cropper and I were producing Leave on Helm, and we were in a small room, and Leave on and all the other guitars and stuff were there. So we said, the song we did yesterday, we want to take another shot at that, because he went and put a rough vocal on it after we'd done it. And he said, yeah, I wouldn't mind taking another shot at it. And we said, great. And we said, can you sing along with this? And so we just put up a dynamic mic, nothing special. because there's going to be so much bleed. We know it can't be used for it. But my God, when he started to sing Cropper and I looked at each other and went, oh my God. All the difference in the world. You're singing, there's no word sheet, you're playing, and the feel of his voice, his phrasing, everything was just magic. And when you can do that, you're gonna have the ability to make records of any kind. And as the genre changes, so to speak, when you have that kind of soul and that kind of feel, you can follow it and be absolutely solid and confident knowing where you're going because it's supposed to. Rubber Soul to Sgt. Pepper. Do you think anything changed? Yeah, lots. And that's what's supposed to happen with bands. Don't you take somebody's first album and the songs sound just like the last album, which is 15 albums in between, then it's a business. And it's not quite the same. But like I'm saying, there is no wrong way to do it. And I'm not rapping anybody for doing that. If you can do it and get records out of it and it's working for you, do it.
Well, it seems like it was almost like back in the day you were able to create the art, which was incredible music.
Yeah.
And the business end took over and made it work for the record sales, the distribution,
the technology,
but they allowed you to be the artist.
Yeah, selling the software and everything. They've got, okay, and here's your drum samples. You can use these, and pretty soon every artist has got the same drum samples and the same reverb. Imagine
if you will, Ozzy Osbourne goes into a record executive meeting today in 2025 and bites the head off of a bat. And throws it on the table. They signed him.
Like I said, there's no wrong way to do it.
You know, it's just like so. But times have definitely changed.
Oh yeah.
But now, working with those incredible artists from my past. I mean, you worked with Jean-Luc Ponty. You were able to work with so many of these people.
What a guy.
When Mystical Adventures honestly was one of my high school. I wore that vinyl out. I've seen Jean-Luc Ponty so many times at the Greek Theater, and to know that you're actually able to work with these cats. You know,
glad you mentioned him because it's one of the few things, and there's been a few artists. He's one of them. Little Richard was one of them. But when I'm sitting there recording them, it's like, whoa, hold it! It's just like, oh my God, I'm hearing this. Or Little Richard has said, here's the vocal sitting beside me at the board singing, and it's like that one. Suddenly you realize what you're doing and who you're with, but the rest of the time you're with the musicians, you're with the rest of the guys. And
and with that said, and I've always asked this to myself, and I've said that a few times to folks, what is it like when you're mixing a song, you got it up on the console, and you're listening to it, and you're feeling to yourself, this is a hit. I think we got something.
Yep.
You know, that just must be an exhilarating feeling.
It's incredible. And it's funny, I used to, I'd start an album and I'd say, yeah, I like this song's my favorite, and that's my favorite. I won't do that anymore. By the end of the album, the song you would never expect, and it's like, oh my God, did that turn out? This is incredible. So yeah, it's an incredibly exhilarating feeling. It just it produces endorphins. And that's
certainly.
Yeah.
Most certainly.
Yep. That's the cure-all. That really is. The medical industry feels that some endorphins may end up being the cure-all to everything, including cancer, because they don't know exactly what they do besides, making things work better and
feel a little bit
feel
better, positive flow.
But the neat thing about that is I've said this before, but there's a survey done by one of the major, I think it was John Hopkins, I don't know. But the survey was about endorphin and what they were finding about it. And the biggest producers of endorphin was food, sex, and music.
Interesting.
And what do they have in common? When you do is something that delicious, or sex, or music, it's impossible to think, oh God, my taxes are due tomorrow.
Right.
How am I going to? No, you're in the moment and you're in the best place you could possibly be. You're thrilled with what you're doing. There's a negative thought in your head. And it's a wonderful thing to be that way. And if you do music, you'll get a chance to see that more than most people ever do.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
That's profound.
Thank you.
Because it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, it does. I mean, when you see it, and the other thing that's problem, and it always has been. And like a lot of that is the industry is, there's always been drugs in music. And part of the reason for that is for one reason or another, and whether it's outside pressure, whether it's whatever, they can't get in the headspace that they get into when then they can write, then they can shut the rest of the world out. And it's unfortunate that that's the way it works, and it doesn't have to. And I think as people are getting smarter and realizing it, they get the same joy out of music without anything. You don't have
Get
to
a
do
natural
that.
high.
Yeah.
So
Again,
did you end up in producing for film and television?
Well, our friends would come out to the ranch and stuff like that and ask, hey, do you want to produce this with me and stuff? And we do it that way. And we did a Roger Corman movie with Flo and Eddie out at the ranch. That was an experience. And that was incredible. And that was one of the first that you might call a actual budgeted movie. And from then on, we produced acts. A lot of acts had come into the studio that we'd produce, and they were fairly major. I produced Harry Nilsson. I produced a song on Ricky Lee Jones. I did.
well, you have you've done some work even on the movie Popeye.
Yeah,
That's one of my favorite movies with
Oh,
Robin
God.
Williams.
That was so fun. Harry and I did it. We were producing Harry, and Harry's was like a 14-month long album. And this wasn't taking vacations. We were working them through. And Cropper had to go out and do a quick Blues Brothers tour for like a week. So Harry said, Bruce, come on. I got a movie. Let's do this. It's Popeye. And it was like, oh boy. So Harry brought in this bizarre organ that took giant discs, like records, but they were silver discs. They were optical discs. And it made the weirdest noises I've ever heard. And we got Shelley Duvall to come in and sing. And that's where we made all those wonderful sounding things.
Incredible.
And, that was so much fun.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the way sessions and things should be. I used to come in and see people screaming at the musicians or the musicians pacing the floor and thinking, oh God, what am I going to do?
That's
Go
funny.
play.
The Blues Brothers is my grandpa's favorite film. But speaking of
Yeah.
family members, I saw that you're working on what is the Wings of Fire? That my daughter reads those books.
Oh, wow.
She
cool.
recently asked me, "Oh, there's going to be a show. Can you look it up on Amazon?" And it said that it was in production and you're working on that. Do you have a release date yet?
I don't know. Do we? Yeah, once people come in and do that, they don't always have a release date. In fact, there's so many records when somebody says, wow, you made this record. And I said, I did. And one of the reasons was they didn't oftentimes name the album until, after it was recorded and release date. And in those days, release dates could be as long as a year after you'd finished the record because all the labels would get together and talk so you wouldn't have
And
two
this is an
giants.
animation. Like, animation takes a
Yeah.
lot longer.
So a lot of things like that get by, and it's sometimes I'll be totally surprised. Wait, I cut that? It's like, oh.
We have another person that you've worked with, John Carpenter.
Yeah.
So how did you meet?
My wife is an actress, and she was hired by John to go up and do the remake of Village of the Damned, which were the kids.
Right.
And do that. And Connie was up there, and I had just finished the Lemonheads, just finished the last mix on the Lemonheads, and I thought, good time to take a break. So I flew up and rented a car and drove down the Sir Francis Drake Trail there up into the area where it's by Bodega Bay, but it's above that. It's the lighthouse that John used in the fog. And so I went up there and I watched several days of filming and just had a great time. And it's an incredible area. Everything, the little restaurants that they built houses and changed them. It was just awesome. And John was incredibly busy, and I just got a chance just to meet him and talk to him for a little bit. And he said, "All right, well, I'm in the middle of all this stuff, but we'll get in touch when I get back." And so anyway, when he gets back, John Carpenter's here. I said, "Oh, great." So we go and sit and talk. And he said, "Look, I was really busy up there, but I know the stuff you've been doing." And he said, "We were listening to the Lemonheads record, and I had no idea you did that." And he said, "I'd like to do Village of the Damned here with you." And so we started that, and then I did Vampires and Ghosts of Mars and Masters of Horror and all that stuff with John. And we had a wonderful time. We had a great time doing it. And John, once again, is a musician, and he loves it. He's there for every day of the soundtrack. There's no time that he's not in the room. And so we had a great time. We had some wonderful stories. He wanted a Metallica record, and he said, "I'm using his temp music and everything, and and I just the getting all the music in, I could use this a couple of times." And he said, "We get it," and so we did. And Tiffany went and got all the info on it, and it would have been incredibly expensive to get the song. And I'm saying, it was the song or was it the style of music? And he said, "No, I guess it's the style." And I said, "Heavy metal, right?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, that's what it is. So I had a couple friends that I'd worked with, and I worked with a girl. His name was Pearl, and her boyfriend at the time was Scott Ian from Anthrax. Usually a big boy. And so Scott comes in and says, "Look, Pearl is a singer, and I want her to do a record. Would you produce her?" And yeah, I did. And so we became good friends. And then I got Anthrax to go in, and instead of Metallica, I put screens up out in the studio, and so everybody could see the screen, and say, "Look, take a look at this," and I'd put the picture up and say, "This is a 30-second cue. Watch what you're seeing on the screen, and what would you play?" And it's not like, "Okay, here's the music, here's what I want you to play." Right. It's Anthrax. It's like, you wouldn't.
So they were scoring a film now.
Yeah,
and we scored 36 seconds.
We did something like 60 minutes of music in a week on the thing, and each one of those cues was played for what was on the screen. And I think we won the Sci-Fi Award that year for the music soundtrack, and it was awesome.
That's great.
Yeah. And then we had Steve Vai and Buckethead and Cropper and Ducky Dunn come in and do overdubs and stuff and a couple other things.
Ducky Dunn.
Yeah, boy.
The Blues Brothers and the Blues Brothers Band, if you haven't seen the Blues Brothers movie, and if you don't know who the Blues Brothers Band is, you really got to tune into that. Steve Cropper, Duck Dunn are two of my favorite players, bass and guitar.
Oh, me too.
That is just incredible. That you have this history in you, and so much of it, and all of it is centered around Cherokee Studios, and Cherokee Studios is a whole different story.
Oh, it sure is,
and it's going to have to be for another day, because where it started to where it is today is an complete different.
Well, the fact that this is our 53rd or 54th year.
Wow.
Tiffany's here with us as a partner. Tiffany Downey is here with us, and she is a partner with the new Cherokee Studios.
Yep.
So we definitely want to say hello and acknowledge her for being in the studio with us.
And we will have a follow-up episode including all of that information.
Yeah, we're gonna get Tiffany.
But to help us close out this amazing interview, what are some key points you would like to share about what it took in this music industry for you?
You mean
advice?
Like blind faith, about being in it, and about what it takes to follow your passion.
About what it takes to be a band. Let's start with that, because I have so many new bands come in, and it's like, we've been together for 3 months now, everything, and it's like, okay, you're still a collection of musicians. You're not a band yet. Bands are something different. Bands are something completely different. You don't have people stepping on each other and first one to the chorus gets the solo kind of thing. It's it's a whole different approach to it. And when you do that, you will come up with a sound that nobody else can do but this group of people. And you've heard it so many times. And unfortunately, sometimes when they do that and they've been together a long time and they have success, they come apart. And it's really a shame when it happens. Creedence Clearwater, one tour, 30 days. All the songs are written on the one tour, and they weren't around much longer than that. The Buffalo Springfield, people think that band was around forever. No, it wasn't. Like a year and a half. I think we did the only tour they ever did with them. And
Wow.
It's just, yeah, when you see things like that and people want the instant gratification, it's, it's unfortunate that they do, but the instant gratification can work well in other businesses. But, God, don't paint pictures that way. So why do you think you can make music that way? It's not. It's what you know, and it's what comes out. It's where your soul. It's what your soul
That's great.
knows. Yeah.
I do want to give a shout out to a band that you are working with recently, and I do want to say a band, like you say, Heavenly Trip to Hell.
Yes.
They came in as such a strong unit that it's something that you just don't see often, and it was incredibly inspiring for me.
Yep.
So I definitely wanted to give them a shout out for what you guys got going.
Their level of community was very inspiring.
Yeah.
They're doing something unique. They've stepped outside of the path of what heavy metal is, and I'm going up and I'm thinking, heavy metal bands are usually 3 of them, and there's like 6 guys up there. And the lighting man has got to be part of the band.
Yeah.
He's 7.
Incredible.
He's definitely part of it. And it's so cool to see in the middle of the song, then there's all of a sudden these pushes, and all the guitar players play the pushes and everything. They'll sing backgrounds to it. It's becoming more musical. Heavy metal, and particularly out here with bands that aren't together long, they play eighth note chugs, tig, 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 tig. That's about it. But not these guys. They're playing some serious stuff.
Well, what are your final words to end this podcast for those who are inspiring to be in your position or who are aiming for similar dreams?
Well, if you're doing it to make a hit record, or you're doing it so that hit record will make you famous, try and step away from that. Try and listen to the music, and try and do something that you can do for the rest of your life. The guys that are writing the kind of things that they're doing now are stuck in a genre. But the reason the Beatles and so many of the bands have changed over the years, don't be afraid of that change, and don't be afraid of the labels. You're not making records for the labels, although you'll end up with one, but you're not making them for the label. You're making them for yourself. You're making them for the band. And try and approach your music that way, because when you're doing it and making it for yourself, you'll get the real thing. You'll get what you're capable of doing, and if you do it right, you'll be able to do it for the rest of your life.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Keeping it real with Bruce Robb on the Candlepower Hour.
Thank you, Bruce Robb.
I've enjoyed this.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to wrap this one up. We are here at the A4S Studios in Burbank. We want to give them a shout out too. Thank you very much to Ivan. Thank you.
Thank you to ElectraCast.
And thank you to ElectraCast Media, electracast.com. Absolutely. Couldn't do this without you. Thank you.
Okay. That was fun.
Sit, Lulu, sit.
Powered by
ElectraCast.